It's an understatement to say the PlayStation 2 had a great library, but if there was one area where it fell behind the original Xbox and PC, it was first-person shooters. Halo, Doom, and Half-Life were either unavailable or just playing better on the other side of the fence. That didn't mean Sony simply gave up though. Killzone was the PS2's answer to the exclusive FPS problem. The first game wasn't particularly memorable, but with the move to the PS Triple, it felt like things were about to change. The sequel had a stunning first trailer. It was pure CGI, not running on actual PS3 hardware, but nonetheless, if you saw it at the time, it grabbed your attention. Guerrilla Games, much like Evolution Studios with MotorStorm, fell victim to the trend of target render trailers at the E3 2005. And I can still vividly remember watching those pixelated trailers and seeing the pictures in magazines, just being in awe of what was shown. It looked too good to be true. But as a somewhat naive teenager, I thought to myself, surely they wouldn't exaggerate that much, would they? To put it mildly, oh yes, they would. Those trailers were simply a vision for the game, but they placed enormous pressure on the development team. Killzone 2 in particular was delayed multiple times. And while it never became the Halo killer, and arguably it never tried to be, Killzone 2 remains a good game that has aged in interesting ways. So make yourself comfortable and stick around, because we're going to take a look back at Killzone 2. And I have to start with one of the aspects that has aged the best, its atmosphere. The gunplay can feel a bit clunky and heavy, but in this case I'd argue it actually adds to the sense of weight, danger, and the fog of war. Your movement is deliberate. Corridors are dark and poorly lit. You can't just snap around in an instant, so every move has to be carefully planned. The graphics can be a bit blurry, which enhances the fog of war effect, but it can also make spotting enemies difficult. And that was a mistake I made when I first started playing. I was playing too aggressively, which led to many unnecessary deaths. But the combat itself has a satisfying feel that has aged remarkably well. There's a real physicality and impact to your shots. Enemies react to hits. They don't just instantly drop dead. You can also hear grunts and screams when you land a well-placed grenade. The environmental variety is also impressive. The game moves you around the stark contrast between the industrialized streets of Helgen and the clean, orderly palaces of top army officers, which clashes again with the sandy wastelands we explore later on. And we can't forget the sound design. The combat, the gunplay, the soundtrack, even the sound of empty shells hitting the ground, all these audio elements combine to create intense situations that kept me pushing forward. The voice acting isn't great, but let's be honest, you're not here for Oscar-worthy performances, you want good shooting. And Killzone 2 successfully combines stunning visuals, an oppressive atmosphere, and excellent sound design to create an immersive and challenging combat experience. It all feels incredibly impressive. Brutal, dangerous, and it almost makes you question how the hell it runs on a PS3. And this game comes from an era where the standard control scheme for console FPS games was still, let's say, up for debate. Unlike Resistance Fall of Man, you can't fully remap the buttons, but thankfully there's a preset that lets you shoot with R2 and throw grenades with R1, which feels much more modern. The gameplay leans more towards a tactical shooter than a run-and-gun arcade experience. You have to be careful, use your grenades, make good use of cover, and as Call of Duty once reminded us, switching to your pistol is faster than reloading. Fortunately, friendly fire isn't universal. You can't kill your Alpha Squad buddies, which is a relief because I landed more than a few shameful friendly fire shots. You can also revive your teammates during the campaign. And the enemies you're fighting are the Helghast. While there isn't a huge amount of enemy variety, you are fighting a uniformed army after all, their design is incredibly striking. Those glowing red eyes not only make for great cover art, but also effectively communicate that you're fighting a dangerous, vainglorious enemy. And the way enemies react to shots is really nice. They don't just fall down. The ragdoll animations are great. Aside from a couple of standouts, the guns aren't that memorable initially, to the point that I'd often pick up a new weapon and barely notice the difference. But things get better in the second half of the campaign as you get access to a wider arsenal. And some of those weapons can be really satisfying. The flamethrower is wonderful in the right situation. The bolt gun is fun to use, and my personal favorite is the energy-powered VC5 rifle, which fires electrical charges and is possibly the most OP gun in the game. But there's a design choice that makes you gravitate toward the time-tested basic rifles. You can only carry one primary weapon alongside your pistol. This limitation discourages you from trying something new, as you're less likely to risk swapping your reliable assault rifle for a situational weapon like the flamethrower. Beyond the game design, the technical performance also reminds us that we're playing a 7th gen game. Killzone 2 targets 30 FPS but has occasional frame drops, and you can't change the painfully narrow FOV. That said, even with these limitations, the visuals themselves were really great for the era and actually are still impressive. What can be more frustrating are the other technical hitches. The loading times are quite lengthy, and you eventually experience the occasional stutter mid-level as the game is loading a new area. Fortunately, the loading hiccups aren't the only thing to break the pace. There are some vehicle or mounted gun sections to add some welcome variety. The tank section in particular was clunky to control but still fun to play. The anti-air gun is pretty neat though, and a great change of pace in the middle of the Hellgun surprise attack. And the exoskeleton with its machine gun and rocket launcher is a great way to get revenge on the Hellgas near the end of the campaign. This game will also make you use the 6-axis on certain occasions, mostly to open valves or set up explosives. It's annoying at first, but once you get the hang of it, it becomes just a little annoying instead. Now, before we properly set foot into the second game, let's do a quick recap of how we got here. The story is set several centuries in the future, after nuclear war has left Earth uninhabitable, forcing humanity to seek out new home worlds. What's left of humanity makes its way to the Alpha Centauri system. And for our story, it all boils down to the animosity between the two sides. We have the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, or ISA, on the Earth-like planet Vecta, and the Hellgun Corporation, which is then exiled on the harsh wasteland of the planet Hellgun. As a result, the Hellgun Empire was born, and their desire for revenge was fueled more and more. So the Hellgas' desire to retake Vecta and expand their empire is ever present. In the first game, we play as ISA Captain Jean Templar alongside teammates Luger, Rico, and a half Haggas named Haka. There's treason from a high-ranking officer and a nuclear threat, but you ultimately manage to avert a full-scale disaster. But the war is far from over. Just 2 years after the events of the first game, the ISA launches a full-scale invasion of the Hellgun homeworld to end the war once and for all. The objective is to capture the Hellgas leader, Scholar Visari. Your mission is simple on paper: move from territory to territory, weaken the enemy's presence, and arrest him. This time we play as Sergeant Sev, and from the previous team, Rico is back as our squad leader, as annoying as ever, and our former protagonist, Jean Templar, is now a colonel overseeing the invasion. The campaign really surprised me, though not for its story. I didn't care much for the characters or the heavier moments, like Garza's death, but the pacing is excellent. You're always on the move. The combat is visceral yet tactical, and it's only about 8 or 9 hours long. You're more likely to be left wanting more than wishing it would end sooner. Throughout the game, we learn the Hellgas have a secret power source for their weapons, a bluish element called petrocite, which we find in strange energy harnessing towers and later in powerful energy weapons. And during a surprise Hellgas attack, Jean Templar is killed by Colonel Radek and the nuclear codes are stolen. In a move perfectly suitable to a tyrant, Visari detonates the bomb within his own city, annihilating not only the invading ISA forces, but much of his own army as well. And that's how the game ends. I'm joking, of course. If you've played enough action games, you know the good guys always somehow pull through. Sev, Rico, and a few other ISA soldiers survive and mount a final, desperate assault on Visari's palace. This culminates in a final boss battle against Colonel Radek. We then reach Visari's throne room, where the orders are simply to arrest him. But war takes its toll. Fueled by rage and grief over his losses, Rico ignores his orders and executes Visari on the spot. We then see that the Hellgas war machine is far from defeated, and once again, the war is not over. Nor were the game modes, at least back when the servers were online. But with the servers shut down, Killzone 2 today is essentially an offline experience. What this means is that for an older game stuck on the PS3, emulation once again comes to the rescue, though not without its own issues. Still, it gives us a glimpse of what yet another abandoned franchise could look like with a modern remaster. Now, I think it's really interesting to look back at this game's journey. After its infamous E3 trailer, the game suffered multiple delays, and we can only imagine the pressure the team was under. Finally, in 2009, it was time to see the real deal. And while it didn't quite match that impossible trailer, Killzone 2 was successful enough to warrant a sequel, and Guerrilla Games began work on Killzone 3. And I always find it funny when people say that Killzone 2 looks like the fake video games you see characters playing in movies. I think this is largely due to its minimal UI, the weird FOV, and incredibly cinematic presentation even during gameplay. But rest assured, it's a very real and a very playable game. And in the early 2010s, the franchise seemed to be going strong, as Killzone Shadowfall became a PS4 launch title. Unfortunately, it's now been over a decade since Shadowfall, and Guerrilla Games and Sony have happily moved on to the more marketable and successful Horizon series. Funnily enough, the old comparisons to Halo and Call of Duty now seem to work in Killzone's favor. It delivers a high-quality, focused single-player campaign of a kind we rarely see anymore, especially as the genre has shifted its focus towards live service multiplayer, skins, and battle passes. And I've heard great things about the online multiplayer, but I can only imagine how good it was at the time. It's been over 16 years since it's released, and the original servers are, of course, long gone. But just like with MotorStorm, the great folks at PS1 and PS Rewired have managed to bring it back online with custom servers. And I'll add links in the description below if you feel like trying it out. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by Killzone 2. It isn't a Halo killer, and I don't think it ever wanted to be. It didn't match its infamous E3 trailer, but in some ways what we got looks even better. And best of all, it has a great, well-paced campaign. There were so many combat encounters where I was completely locked in. You're pressured into a corner, enemies call for reinforcements, and you and your squad have to do whatever it takes to survive. I was genuinely surprised by just how satisfying the campaign is. Not because of the story, but because of the atmosphere it created kept me engaged. And while the atmosphere might trick you into thinking this couldn't possibly run on a PS3, the FPS drops, the mid-level stutters, the heavy controls and clunky movement are a constant reminder that this is indeed a game from 2009. But Killzone 2 isn't the kind of game you miss because its gameplay was ahead of its time or because it was a Halo killer. You miss it for the incredible atmosphere, the tight campaign, and for what it represents. Sony still trying to find its footing in the FPS genre. Fortunately, the sequel, Killzone 3, would arrive just 2 years later. But that's a topic for a future video, and if you want to see that, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment for the algorithm. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.